Hi, and welcome back to Heimler's History. In the last few videos, we've been talking about the Industrial Revolution and the massive changes that accompanied its advent. And in this video, we're going to narrow in on some of the economic and social changes that accompanied the Industrial Revolution as states began to industrialize. And if that sounds funner to you than getting kicked in the face by a zebra, then let's get to it. So as the Industrial Revolution began to take hold in many states, there was a significant economic shift. States that had long embraced the economic system of mercantilism now abandoned it in favor of Adam Smith's laissez-faire capitalism. And in case you forgot, mercantilism was the economic system which championed the following tenets. First, there's only a fixed amount of wealth in the world, so if my slice of the pie is going to be bigger, yours has to be smaller. Second, a country's portion of that wealth was measured in silver and gold. Third, in order to accumulate more silver and gold, a state had to maintain a favorable balance of trade, by which they meant more exports than imports. And fourth, colonies existed to serve the parent country by sending raw materials and buying manufactured goods. Now, all of this required heavy government intervention. Now, free market economics, or capitalism, which aren't exactly the same thing, but for our purposes we'll use the terms interchangeably, posits that there is no limit on the creation of wealth. Furthermore, people should be left alone to make economic decisions by the forces of supply and demand. If they are left alone to do so, then they will ultimately make decisions that benefit society economically. And so that naturally means that capitalism requires Big Daddy government to step aside and leave consumers and producers alone. Needless to say, the shift from mercantilist economies to free market economies created a buttload of wealth for those who actually made the change. Now, this economic shift led to new ways of organizing businesses. You may remember back in the last unit we talked about joint stock companies, which established trading posts all throughout the world. And the rise of these kinds of entities was a significant economic innovation on the way new trading ventures and exploration was financed. And what you need to remember about them for the purposes of this video is how they worked. Several investors invested money into a company, and if that company succeeded, the shareholders were paid handsomely. However, the shareholders were also responsible for the debts of the company if it failed. So, it was definitely a risky proposition. But during this period, we see the rise of the descendants of joint stock companies, namely corporations. And corporations work just like joint stock companies, except they introduced something very significant, namely limited liability. Under this system, shareholders shared in the profits of the company, but their liability for the debts of the company was limited, which is to say they could only lose the amount of money that they originally invested in the company. And hey, if you got a corporation in one country, why not have one in 9 countries? And now we see the rise of multinational corporations. Let me just give you 2 examples. First, the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation, established by the British. After the Opium Wars, British merchants flooded into China in order to establish trade. And quickly they decided that they needed a bank to finance their wares. Because after all, the amount of opium that's required to get the bulk of the Chinese population stoned off of their brains, well, that ain't gonna pay for itself. And so this bank eventually established branches in many nations, including China and Japan. A second example of multinational corporations established during this period was the Unilever Corporation. So the British and the Dutch partnered to establish this one, and their goal was to produce and sell household items, most notably soap. And so they established factories in many different nations in order to manufacture and sell these items. And even to this day, the Unilever Corporation is still keeping us filthy people clean. Now, maybe it goes without saying, but because these multinational corporations were global in scale, they became massively wealthy on a scale prior to this was pretty rare. Alright, now you didn't think all this economic innovation wasn't going to have any social consequences, did you? So right along with the rise of capitalism and the profusion of manufactured goods on the market came a rise of a consumer culture among the middle classes in many industrialized societies. In general, standards of living rose, and people had more disposable income with which they could buy the dizzying array of goods on the market. But there was only so much that people could buy. That didn't stop companies from improving their manufacturing methods and producing more goods for sale than any population could possibly afford. So what are you going to do? Well, you create the advertising industry. Here was a whole industry that rose up devoted to the task of making people feel empty inside unless they bought product X. And finally, as a result of all these shifts, you see the rise of a leisure culture. Now, because people spent long and dreary days working inside factories, they began to long for escape, and so you get pubs popping up all over the dang place. It was a place that people could go after work and socialize and drink away the dreariness of factory life. And as this practice gained popularity in the 1800s, you began to see some of the first modern references to the problems of alcoholism. But on a lighter note, a new invention called the bicycle became popular among middle-class folks who could afford them. Also, people got really into cockfighting, which, in case you're unfamiliar with the practice, is when people bet on 2 roosters who fight and kill each other. So that's fun. And also during this time, people took their leisure increasingly by watching spectator sports like horse racing and baseball. I mean, why play sports when you can just watch watch other people play them. Okay, that's what you need to know about Unit 5, Topic 7 of AP World History. If you need help with your AP World History class or a good resource to study for your exams in May, then here's a view packet that I think will make all your dreams come true. If you want me to keep making videos for you, then subscribe and come along. I'm glad you tuned in. Heimler out.